After 14 years working in a burn unit, seeing injuries and pain that most people could never even imagine, Gwen Holloway believed there was nothing left that could shock her. She had seen everything, or at least she thought she had, until one cold November morning, when something happened that would forever change the only nurse in that hospital who didn't believe in miracles. A moment that many would later call a miracle of the Virgin Mary. But before we continue, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I'm curious to see just how far stories like this travel. Have you ever worked nights? Not just occasionally, but every night, year after year. Gwen Holloway was 38 years old, and she had worked the night shift for 14 straight years. She was the head nurse in the burn unit. That meant that from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m., the entire unit was her responsibility. If something went wrong during the night, her name was the one everyone called. And Gwen handled it the same way she handled everything. Breathe. Focus. Work. She lived alone in a small apartment about 20 minutes from the hospital. No husband. No children. No close family nearby. Just a quiet orange cat named Oliver, who waited by the door every morning when she came home from work. You know the kind of person who seems completely unshakable? Someone who can face situations that would make most people collapse and remain calm? That was Gwen. But it wasn't because she didn't care. It was because she had seen too much. More than a decade working in a burn unit changes a person. You don't become cold. You learn to store your emotions somewhere deep inside, somewhere that doesn't interfere with the job. Because if you stop to feel everything, you can't care for anyone. And caring for people was what Gwen did best. Her co-workers respected her. Nobody argued with Gwen, not because they were afraid of her, but because they trusted her. In 14 years, she had never made the wrong decision during a crisis. Not once. Doctors relied on her judgment. New residents learned by watching how she worked. You know what a burn unit feels like during the night shift? Silence. The kind of silence that only hospitals have. Machines humming quietly. Soft footsteps in the hallway. Muted voices at the nursing station. Gwen knew every detail of that unit. She could tell when a patient was getting worse simply by looking at them. She could sense when a coworker needed help without them saying a word. She was good at her job. The best. But there was something about Gwen that few people knew. When she was young, she used to go to church. Her mother had taken her every Sunday. But after Gwen started working in the burn unit, she stopped. She didn't argue with God. She didn't blame him. She simply stopped thinking about him. Because when you see the things Gwen saw every night, it becomes difficult to believe someone up there is paying attention. It was Tuesday night when the phone rang at 11:30 p.m. Emergency transfer. A patient was being sent from a smaller hospital nearly 2 hours away from the capital. The report came through quickly. Severe burns. 2nd and 3rd degree. 40% of the body. Construction site accident. Gwen wrote everything down on her notepad, her movements automatic. She alerted the team. Prepared the bed. Notified the attending physician. Everything happened almost on autopilot. Just another patient. His name was Derek Shelton, 29 years old, an electrician working at a construction site in rural Minnesota. The technical details in the chart didn't matter to Gwen yet. What mattered was the condition. Critical. Derek arrived heavily sedated. The emergency dressings applied by the first hospital were well done, but Gwen knew they were temporary. The next few hours would decide a lot. 2 women came with the ambulance. His mother and his sister. The mother's name was Patrice. She looked to be in her early 60s. Her gray hair was tied in a bun, and she wore a thick winter coat. Patrice kept both hands buried in the pockets of that coat. At the time, Gwen noticed it but didn't understand why. Later she would. Inside her pocket, Patrice was holding a rosary. The entire time. Derek's sister was named Naomi. She looked younger than him. Maybe 24 or 25. Naomi hardly spoke. She stood quietly beside her mother, staring at the floor as if looking at anything else would be too painful. Have you ever seen a mother sitting in a hospital waiting room in the middle of the night? That expression that combines fear, exhaustion, and a strength that comes from somewhere deep inside. Patrice had that expression. Gwen oversaw Derek's admission into the burn unit. The team began the initial procedures. The attending physician, Dr. Bennett, examined the patient and later spoke with Patrice and Naomi in the waiting room. He didn't sugarcoat the situation. The burns are extensive, he said calmly. The next 72 hours will be decisive. We'll do everything we can. The following morning, Patrice entered Derek's room quietly. She stood beside the bed for a long time without saying anything. Then, before leaving, she placed a small statue of the Virgin Mary on the bedside table. It was only about 4 inches tall. The blue mantle was worn from years of being carried around. The kind of statue someone keeps in a purse for decades. Patrice looked at the statue. Then she looked at her son. "She'll take care of you when we can't," she whispered. The first few days in the burn unit were the hardest. Gwen followed Derek's case closely every night. She spoke with the day staff during shift changes. Everyone understood the situation. Critical. Dr. Bennett remained cautious in every update. He never gave false hope. When Patrice asked about her son, he answered honestly. "He's stable, but still critical. We're monitoring him hour by hour." You know what waiting in a hospital feels like? It's different from any other kind of waiting, because you never know if the next update will bring relief or the worst news of your life. Every minute without news is both a blessing and a torment. Then came Derek's 5th night in the unit. And that was when everything changed. Gwen was doing her 3 a.m. rounds. The quietest moment of the shift. Most patients were sleeping. The nurses sat at the station writing reports and drinking coffee. Gwen walked slowly down the corridor. When she reached Derek's room, she stopped. There was a woman standing beside his bed. Gwen froze. The woman wore a light-colored robe with a long mantle. Her face looked calm, peaceful. Her hands were extended above Derek. They weren't touching him. They were simply there, open, almost as if she were caring for him, as if she were giving something to him. Something good. Something that filled the entire room with a feeling Gwen had never experienced inside that hospital. Peace. Gwen blinked. Looked again. The woman was still there, standing beside Derek with her hands stretched out above him. Gwen took a step forward. Then another. She entered the room. But the moment she reached the doorway, the woman was gone. Derek remained asleep. The room was empty. The bedside table stood beside him, and on it was the small statue of the Virgin Mary. Nothing else. Gwen walked back to the nursing station, sat down, took a sip of coffee, and thought. Fatigue. Years of night shifts. Dim lighting. The human brain plays tricks when it's tired. That was the logical explanation. Gwen returned to her paperwork. In front of her were the security camera monitors for the unit. Small black and white screens showing corridors, rooms, and patient beds. The image quality wasn't great, but you could clearly see movement. Gwen was filling out a form when she glanced up at the monitors out of habit. And that's when she saw it. Camera 3. Derek's room. A woman standing beside the bed. Her hands extended above him. In the exact same position Gwen had just seen. The same presence. Gwen dropped her pen and stared at the monitor. The image was clear. A figure stood beside Derek's bed, hands extended gently above him. Exactly the same presence she had just seen in the room. Her heart began to pound. Gwen pushed back her chair and hurried down the corridor toward Derek's room. When she reached the doorway, she stopped. The room was empty. Derek lay sleeping peacefully in the bed. The monitors displayed normal readings. There was no one else inside. Gwen stood there for a moment, confused. Then she turned and walked quickly toward the hospital's security room. "I need to see the recording from camera 3 for the last 10 minutes, she told the guard. The request seemed strange, but he didn't question her. He opened the system and rewound the footage. Frame by frame, they watched the recording. Derek's room appeared on the screen. The bed, the bedside table, the statue of the Virgin Mary. But the room remained empty the entire time. No woman, no figure, nothing. "Do you see something?" the guard asked. Gwen shook her head. "No," she replied quietly. "I thought I saw someone entering the unit. Must have been a reflection." She thanked him and returned to the nursing station. When she sat down, she noticed something that almost never happened. Her hands were shaking. Gwen Holloway, the nurse who never panicked, never doubted, never hesitated. And now she sat there staring at her hands. Have you ever experienced something like that? You see something with your own eyes, clear as day, but when you check the evidence, it isn't there. So who do you believe? Your eyes, or the machine? Gwen chose to trust the machine. But deep down, somewhere far beneath her calm exterior, she knew what she had seen. And that unsettled her more than anything. The days passed. Derek remained hospitalized. For a burn case that severe, his condition was surprisingly stable. And stability alone was already something. Every day, Patrice visited. She sat in the same chair beside his bed, her hand always inside her coat pocket clutching the rosary. Sometimes she spoke quietly to her son. Sometimes she simply sat there in silence. And Gwen? She locked the experience away. She told no one. She continued her night shifts exactly as before. Professional, focused, unshakable. But something small had changed. Every time Gwen passed Derek's room during her early morning rounds, she slowed down slightly. Her eyes quietly scanned the corners of the room. Not because she expected anything. At least, that's what she told herself. On the 10th day of Derek's hospitalization, something new happened. Gwen arrived for her shift and listened carefully during the handoff from the day nurse. One detail caught her attention immediately. Derek stabilized, but in a strange way, the day nurse said. His vitals improved slightly since yesterday. The improvement wasn't dramatic. But for a patient in Derek's condition, any positive change mattered. Dr. Bennett found it unusual. The following day, Derek improved again. Then again the next day, Dr. Bennett ordered new tests. He called the plastic surgeon responsible for the grafts, and the two of them carefully reviewed the results. The body is responding better than expected, Dr. Bennett told the medical team. When Patrice heard the news, she simply nodded. I know, she said quietly. Naomi looked at her mother with confusion. What do you mean you know? She asked. Patrice gave a small smile. I asked. Naomi didn't ask who she had asked. She already knew. 3 weeks into Derek's hospitalization, something else happened. It was another quiet Tuesday night. Gwen stepped into Derek's room to check on him. And suddenly she smelled it. Roses. The scent was unmistakable. Strong. Fresh. As if someone had placed a bouquet of newly cut roses inside the room. Gwen stopped moving. The fragrance filled the air around her. It seemed to come from everywhere. Or nowhere. She searched the room, trying to find the source. But there were no flowers. No perfume. Nothing that could explain it. The scent lasted perhaps 20 seconds. Maybe 30. Then it vanished. Just as suddenly as it had appeared. Gwen walked out into the hallway and leaned against the wall. Her hands trembled again. She took a deep breath. Then she returned to the station and finished her paperwork as if nothing had happened. She didn't mention the roses. Not to anyone. Her shift ended at 6 in the morning. She handed over the reports to the day team, spoke professionally about every patient, and left the hospital as she always did. But when Gwen arrived home, she didn't change out of her uniform. She sat on the couch and stared at the wall. Have you ever felt the weight of something you cannot explain? Not fear. Something different. The feeling that something real is happening, but you have no way to understand it. For 14 years, Gwen had handled every situation with certainty. Now she had none. She looked down at her hands. Hands that dressed wounds, administered medication, held the hands of patients during their worst moments. Practical hands. Capable hands. And for the first time in many years, Gwen asked herself a question that had nothing to do with medicine. Could it be that someone else was caring for Derek too? She didn't pray. She didn't even remember how. It had been so long since she had spoken any kind of prayer that the words had faded from memory. Her cat Oliver climbed onto the couch and curled up in her lap. Gwen gently stroked him without noticing. Eventually, she fell asleep sitting there. Meanwhile, Derek kept improving. By the 4th week, the doctors were genuinely surprised. By the 5th week, Derek was awake for longer periods. He began speaking again. At first, only short sentences. Then longer conversations. One night, while Gwen was changing the dressing on Derek's right arm, he looked at her and asked, "Have you worked here a long time?" 14 years, Gwen replied without looking up. Always the night shift. Always. Derek hesitated for a moment. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Do you believe in miracles? Gwen stopped working for a second. She looked at him. He wasn't joking. He was asking seriously. I believe in treatment, she answered calmly. Derek stayed quiet. You're getting better, Gwen said, adjusting the blanket. That's what matters. Then she left the room. Out in the corridor, she paused for a moment before continuing her rounds. Something inside her had changed. It was small, almost impossible to describe, but it was there. She cared for Derek with just a little more attention. Not because she had been careless before. She never was. But now there was something extra. Something she couldn't name. And maybe that was better. Gwen never saw the mysterious figure again. She never smelled the roses again. The quiet night shifts returned to normal. 8 weeks after Derek arrived, Dr. Bennett called Patrice and Naomi into his office. It's time to begin preparing for discharge, he said. The recovery had surpassed every realistic expectation. Derek would still need physical therapy. He would carry scars. His life would never be exactly the same. But he was going to walk out of the hospital. Patrice listened quietly. Naomi squeezed her mother's hand. Gwen heard the news during the next shift. Discharge day arrived on a cold afternoon in January. Derek left the unit sitting in a wheelchair. He was laughing at something Naomi had just said in the hallway. Patrice pushed the wheelchair, and resting in Derek's lap, beside his personal belongings, was the small statue of the Virgin Mary, the same statue that had stood beside his bed for nearly 2 months. The day Derek finally left the burn unit, the entire team gathered near the exit of the ward. One by one, the nurses and doctors said goodbye. They wished him strength, patience, and a full recovery. Derek thanked each of them sincerely. For him, it felt like stepping out of a long, dark tunnel. Months passed. Slowly, Derek regained most of his movement. Physical therapy was difficult, sometimes painful, but he kept pushing forward. Little by little, life returned to something close to normal. Eventually, he went back to work. The scars remained, of course. Some things would never be the same. But Derek was alive, and he was grateful. What Derek never learned were the strange details that surrounded his recovery. He never heard about the woman Gwen saw standing beside his bed. He never knew that the security cameras recorded nothing at all. And he never knew about the scent of roses that filled the room one quiet night. Those moments remained only in Gwen's memory. For Derek, the explanation was much simpler. His mother had told him the truth as she understood it, that the Virgin Mary had watched over him. And for Derek, that was enough. He had grown up seeing Patrice kneel beside her bed every night, rosary in hand, whispering prayers before sleep. Faith had always been part of his life. So when she said the Virgin Mary had taken care of him, he believed her. And Gwen? Her life continued exactly as before. Same hospital, same night shift, same small apartment 20 minutes away. And every morning when she opened the door, Oliver the cat was there waiting for her. Gwen never returned to church. She didn't buy a rosary. She didn't place a statue of the Virgin Mary anywhere in her home. None of that happened. But something had changed. It was subtle, so small that no one else would have noticed. Something in the way she looked at her patients. Something in the way she paused during those quiet dawn rounds. Something in the way she stood beside a bed for just a few seconds longer than before. Gwen still trusted medicine, still trusted science, still trusted experience. But somewhere deep inside her, a tiny space had opened. A space where certainty no longer lived alone. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was simply the long years of working nights. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Something that had stood beside a hospital bed at 3 in the morning. Something that cameras could not record. Something that left behind the scent of roses where no roses should have been. Maybe miracles don't always change the world in dramatic ways. Sometimes they change just one person. Quietly. Almost invisibly. Before we finish, I want to invite you to join our Virgin Mary prayer community. People from different parts of the world united by the same faith. If you feel in your heart the desire to be part of this chain of prayer, click the button below, become a channel member, and come pray with us. And if you stayed with us all the way to the end of Gwen and Derek's story, do something for me. Write one word in the comments. Roses. The scent that should never have existed inside that hospital room. I want to see how many hearts this story truly reached. And every time I read that word, I'll know one more person still believes that miracles happen. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Share in the comments any miracle you've witnessed or experienced in your life. And send this video to someone who might need a little hope today. May the Virgin Mary continue to bless and protect you and your family. Amen.